Professor Rupp, how is America doing in its war against terrorism?
Well, it's been a little over 8 years since the war commenced. And I would say with a change of administration, this is a good time to ask that question and reassess. I think as opposed to being preoccupied with the war on terror, as the Bush administration was, the new administration is able to take stock of where we were in those years and to recalibrate American foreign policy, because for so many of those years we were so centered on the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the hunt for al-Qaeda, Homeland Security, Guantanamo. That dominated American foreign policy. And the United States is a huge, multifaceted nation with many interests. And I believe what is going on right now is a slight recalibration of American interests. And so we're seeing the United States re-engage its interests with Russia, with China, with India, that don't necessarily have to have a component of the war on terror to them, but more specifically deal with the sort of interests that have long dominated the interests between the United States and the other major powers.
What have we learned from 9/11?
Well, we've learned many things from 9/11. One, we've learned that we are a target, and we've learned why we're a target. I remember on September 12th, 2001, I gave a talk. I think you hosted it here on campus. And I think one of my opening statements to the group was there was a reason why the United States was attacked yesterday and why Mexico or Canada or France wasn't attacked. And it's because of our place in the world. And I think one of the issues that we've learned since 9/11 is that we are a target, and we've learned one of the reasons why some extremists view us as a legitimate target. I can't say we've learned how to wage a war successfully, though, since 9/11. I think one of the things that we've learned since 9/11 is how to wage a war on terror and how not to wage a war on terror. Just frankly, the phrase, a war on terror, I think was a very unwise approach. Because when you declare war on a tactic or when you declare war on a phenomena, it is very difficult to successfully win that war. So if you were to ask, is the war on terrorism winnable? I would say no. A war on terrorism isn't winnable because terrorism as a phenomena has been around for 2,000-3,000 years. Ever since human beings have had organized institutions and politics have been a part of those international institutions or even domestic institutions, terrorism has been a factor. So I think what we have learned, though, as time has gone on and as we've had failings in the war on terror and successes in the war on terror, we've moved more in the direction of not militarizing the war, but focusing more on counterterrorism, on police action, on the use of international law to prosecute the rather limited number of individuals who are trying to seriously do damage to the United States. Because the al-Qaeda is actually a reasonably small organization of a number of thousands of individuals, as opposed to a nation state such as Iraq with tens of millions of individuals. These are two different aspects of the international climate. And the Bush administration chose to primarily address the attacks on 9/11 as a military matter. Most analysts now would say that that was a mistake, and the attack on Iraq was a monumental blow to the international prestige of the United States, the international power of the United States. And where we are now, as I said a few moments ago, is we're recalibrating. We're learning what has worked and what has not worked. And I believe what works in the context of terrorism is focusing on the individuals, on the organization that wants to do damage to the nation, using the traditional means of counterterrorism, intelligence gathering, police action, economic constraints, and systematically, periodically using military strikes if appropriate. But to wage a systematic war, mobilizing fleets and mobilizing aircraft carriers, this is not the best way to prosecute that sort of conflict.
As citizens, what can or should we be prepared to do?
Well, of course, we as citizens are divided. This is this country of red and blue. We are never going to be in complete agreement about how to prosecute any conflict, or how to deal with healthcare, or how to deal with immigration. So we as citizens have an obligation, I think, be it red or blue, to participate and to be knowledgeable. I think from my perspective, something that citizens can do is to put pressure on their elected officials to maintain a balance between protection, so providing security against enemies of the United States and against groups such as the Al-Qaeda, who systematically kill women and children and men. Be mindful of that security, but the citizens also have a responsibility to put pressure on their government officials not to undermine traditional American values, such as respect for diversity and respect for democracy and liberty and human rights. Because I think definitely during the first 8 years of the prosecution of the war on terror, we saw any number of domestic institutions harmed by a real concern and a legitimate concern by the administration as to how best to protect the American people. But I do believe in certain cases, the Patriot Act, certainly Guantanamo, that in endeavoring to provide security to the American people, we trampled on some very precious rights. And that's a balance. And I think that's one of the things that an engaged public can do, is to pressure their government, to remind their government that yes, we need security, yes, we need to be mindful of our airports, yes, we need to be mindful of cargo container ships coming in to San Diego and into Florida, but we can't sacrifice our basic human rights and our basic democracy in protection of that security.
Thank you, Professor Rupp.
My pleasure.